I want to thank you for taking some time out of your afternoon to come and learn more about Final Cut 10. My name is Larry Jordan. Toastmasters tells me that you should never start any kind of a public presentation with an apology. But I've never attended a Toastmasters class, so I start all of my public presentations with an apology. And that is that I apologize in advance for bringing an American accent. I know how much that offends you, and I will endeavor to do the best I can. I have finally figured out that you spell organized with an S and not a Z, and I've learned how to pronounce Z. I figured 2 out of 2 ain't doing too bad, but that's about the limit of the extent to which I can solve the problems that I was born with. So I apologize in advance for the offense that this will cause your erudite and highly trained and most learned ears. We're going to spend about 30 minutes together looking at this thing called Final Cut Pro 10. How many of you have heard of Final Cut 10? Raise your hand. How many of you have heard bad things about Final Cut 10? Raise your hand. How many people are still angry at Apple for killing Final Cut 7? All right. Yeah, they sure screwed that up, didn't they? See if this works. Final Cut 10 had a very tumultuous birth. One of the things that I want to drive home today is that you should not confuse Final Cut 10 with the trauma of how it was introduced. I think the launch of Final Cut 10 was one of the worst launches in Apple history, with the possible exception of Mobile Me. At every possible level of this launch, they offended virtually every one of their customers. It is not a successful launch when your competition sales increase by 45%. So what happens is that people say, wow, they killed Final Cut 7, they killed Soundtrack, they killed Motion, they killed DVD Studio Pro, they killed Color, they killed Final Cut Pro Server. My life is over. I'm going to go into a hole and eat worms. And they let that anger flow over into Final Cut 10. If, on the other hand, Apple had decided to release Final Cut 7 and Final Cut 10 at the same time, so we could easily migrate over time, over, say, a year, from Final Cut 7 to Final Cut 10, we'd be saying, this is the greatest thing since the invention of sliced bread. And we'd be rapturous, and we'd be saying, look at this cool thing I just discovered. Look at this. And we'd be patient and willing to wait, but instead they made our life really, really difficult. So, number one, does Apple realize they made a mistake? Yes. They have been spoken to strongly by many people, both publicly and privately. I was at some of the meetings. I know who made the decisions. I have shared your angst with them, although I did not use a shillelagh at the time. The thought had not escaped me. Since that time, what has Apple done? One, they have continued to support Final Cut 7 in all of its flavors. They put Final Cut 7 available for sale on a telephone line. They have continued to let Final Cut 7 and Final Cut 10 coexist, and for the first time in the history of recorded civilization, Apple pre-announced features on a program which had not yet shipped. It is corporately impossible for Apple to say they made a mistake. As soon as they say we screwed up, it's a class action lawsuit, and you know how big their bank account is. It would be flat by the time the lawyers got done with it. So they can't say we made a mistake. What they are doing instead is they're doing everything they can to smooth the transition from Final Cut 7 to Final Cut 10. Is Final Cut 10 perfect? No. Does it have the same feature set as Final Cut 7? No. Is Final Cut 7 ever at some point going to turn into Final Cut 8? No. Final Cut 7 is finished. Development is done. If Apple were to start developing today Final Cut 8, it would take 3 to 4 years for the development to be finished. In 3 to 4 years, you and I both know the industry is going to move on, as will we. So Final Cut 7 is over. With the release of Final Cut 10.3, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later, we now have the ability to take Final Cut 7 projects and move them to Final Cut 10. So now all of us as Final Cut 7 users have the ability to make a transition. We can make a transition from Final Cut 7 to Avid, We can make a transition from Final Cut 7 to Adobe Premiere Pro. We can make a transition from Final Cut 7 to Final Cut 10. And in every case, the amount of data that transfers from one to the other is about the same. Cuts are perfect. Transitions are virtually perfect. Audio levels are perfect. Audio panning is perfect. Where it breaks down is in color grading and effects, because all of those programs use a different system of effects for color grading. So that which we spend the most time with, getting the media, setting in, setting outs, building the story, doing the edit, that stuff will transfer perfectly to any of these applications. The stuff we're going to lose is the high-end color grading and some of the effects, which would be the same if you move to an Avid or if you move to Premiere or if you move to Final Cut. So knowing that Final Cut 10 continues to evolve, also one other thing, it was released on June 23rd last year. Since that time, it's been upgraded 3 times with 2 major upgrades and 1 minor upgrade. Apple has put this on the fast track for development. You don't fast track something you want to kill. There's way too many other resources that engineers can work on. You fast track something where you have a problem and you need to fix it, and you need to fix it quickly. I can't think of anything except possibly OS 10.7, which has been fast-tracked for as much constant revision and improvement as Final Cut 10 has. One other note, and then we are going to see the software, but I just want to back this up. I run my own company, which is Larry Jordan and Associates, Inc. I have never, though I have asked many times, I have never been paid by Apple for a single event, a single thing. You would think that because I support Apple, they would give me huge amounts of money. It would be nice if that were true. Their bank account's bigger than mine, but such is not the case. I'm an independent. And I tried to get sponsorship to come out here so I could, cover my hotel bill and my heavy breakfast bill, but nobody wanted to sponsor me. So I'm here on my own nickel, on my own dime. What you're hearing is my personal opinion, not colored by any sponsors. And yes, I do regularly talk with Apple engineers. Yes, I do have the ability to ask Apple questions, and sometimes, but not always, they'll respond. So I do have an inside track to some of what's going on at Apple, but I do not, as of today, I don't know of anything that Apple is working on for the future. So everything that I'm talking about that's future-focused is based upon my conjecture, not some sort of inside knowledge from Apple. We've already seen that the trauma of the birth of Final Cut 10 has changed what we think about Final Cut 10, so here's my key thought. You want to pick the tool that's right for the job. Final Cut 10 is optimized for a tapeless workflow. It has speed, it has precision, it has ease of use. And the easiest example I can think of about why this is important is imagine you want to hire a carpenter to build you a house. You don't hire a carpenter that builds you a house because they own one hammer or they have a saw. You hire a carpenter who has a wealth of tools to achieve the job at hand. Far too often we identify ourselves as Final Cut editors. We're not Final Cut editors. We are editors. We are visual storytellers. How many people are paid by a client or a corporation to edit video? Raise your hand. Keep it up and look around. We've got about half the room. Don't be embarrassed. I'm not going to humiliate you in public. How many people are paid to edit on a specific piece of software? How many people have clients that have yet realized you don't even edit on a computer? I mean, clients don't care. As long as you meet the deadline and deliver the story, you could use Scotch tape as far as they are concerned. So the pressure for us to use a particular tool doesn't come from the client. The pressure for us to use a particular tool comes from ourselves. It's a guy thing. If we don't have the latest and biggest and fastest engine in our car, we're obviously a failure as a man, and we might as well just go sulk somewhere. Use the tool that's right for the job. Let me illustrate some of the tools that Final Cut provides. I'm going to introduce the Final Cut 10 interface. I'm going to show you how to import media. I'm going to show you how to create a simple project and how to do a simple edit. I'll show you the new precision trimming tools, which are very cool. We're going to highlight some of the new features in the 10.3 update, and then Mike is going to throw a brick at me from the back, and I'm going to have to leave. I could easily talk about Final Cut 10 for the next 19 hours and not materially repeat myself, and we've only got about 25 minutes to spare, so this is about the slowest I'm going to go. I will take the occasional breath. Oh, by the way, there's 2 guys on the left side, 3rd row over here, who've got their arms crossed, and they're looking at each other with quizzical looks on their face, and they're saying, "It looks like iMovie." Therefore, it must be iMovie, as if Drek could suddenly bubble up from the surface of the slime-covered pavement, washing over our computer. My children, how many of you have heard of a Volkswagen? Raise your hand. Yes, it's a car. Good, their advertising is not wasted. How many people have heard of a BMW? Raise your hand. All right. Now, obviously, a Volkswagen has got an accelerator, a Volkswagen has got a brake, a Volkswagen has got a driver's seat, a Volkswagen's got a steering wheel, a BMW's got an accelerator, a brake, a steering wheel, and a driver's seat. Therefore, a BMW and a Volkswagen must be the same thing because they have the same interface. This is brain dead. If every time I got into the car I had to figure out where the brake was, you guys would be in serious jeopardy of losing your life every time I started the engine. You have to have a common interface or you can't get anything done. What's the worst thing of learning a new piece of software? Figuring out how the stupid thing works. One of the things that I've learned is that everybody wants to know, show me the really cool color correction technology. So I open up, I start, and I do a color demo that sucks the eyes out of your head. And then I get emails afterward, and they say, Larry, how do I import my media? How do I create a new project? If you don't know where to start, knowing all the advanced features does you zero good. So I want to show you how to start. This is Final Cut. It has 3 basic sections and a unified interface. This is called the viewer. It's because it's where we view stuff. Anyway, this is the event section, and this is the timeline section. Events are collections of media. That's the definition. An event is a collection of media. There is no necessary relationship between location and time and an event. They could have called it a folder. They could have called it a bin. They could have called it a thingus. They could have called it a basket. They called it an event. Any piece of media from any period of time, in any format, for any reason, at any time, can go into an event. An event is a collection of media. A project is where that media gets edited. So for those of you who say, well, event sounds like a wedding video, yeah, it's a wedding video. It's a school play. It's a day of shooting on a multi-million-dollar set. It's a series of stills. It is a collection of media. The event section has 2 parts. There's the event library and there's the event browser. The event library is a listing of all, is a listing of all the events, all the collections of media that are on your hard disk. Final Cut will support any hard disk that attaches to your Macintosh. I strongly recommend that you store all media to a second drive. Don't use the boot drive. It's the same reason as we don't use the boot drive in Final Cut 7. You don't use the boot drive in Final Cut 10. The boot drive is too busy, too slow, too inefficient, and too occupied. You want to store it to a second drive. As many drives as you have attached will be displayed here in the event library. When you click on one of these, I've clicked on this one called Pond 5, it displays all the media that's in that event. There is no limit to the number of clips that can be stored in an event. There is no limit to the number of events aside from the amount of storage space on your hard disk. There is no limit to the number of projects you create. We'll talk about that more in just a minute. When we look at the event browser, we're able to see 2 different views. One view is what's called the thumbnail view. This is where we're able to see all the images. Now, there's a new feature inside Final Cut 10 called the skimmer. It's toggled on and off with the letter S. When the skimmer is on, you just simply grab your mouse and drag it across the images you want to look at. And what I can do here is I can quickly skim, and in about a second and a half, we all just looked at about 12 different images. In Final Cut 7, double-click the image, load it to the viewer, hit the space bar. Double-click the next image, load it to the viewer, hit the space bar. I get tired of that. The cool thing about the skimmer is you turn it off. Keyboard shortcut is the letter S for skimmer. So when you type the skimmer S on and off, it'll allow you to quickly see what images you want. That's really nice. I use the skimmer when I want to see stuff in a hurry. I turn the skimmer off when I'm editing because it drives me nuts in the timeline. Well, what I want to do is I want to bring media in. So I'm going to bring media in. I shot it on an AVC HD camera. It was shot on well, let's just show you. To bring media in, we have two choices. I can import files if they're already playable by QuickTime. Any .mov file gets imported, or I bring it in from a camera.